Record Store Nation. Welcome back. It is episode 58 of The Record Store. TRS. On the inside, we call it TRS. That is behind the scenes. Don't let that get out. Before we get too far into this episode, I have to thank our opening band there. It is Flight Attendant Paralysis. Those guys are so good. They splintered back in the 60s, 70s. They got back together. Now, honestly, I don't think there's any original members in Flight Attendant Paralysis, but they move on. They trudge on. And I think I've seen them. They're coming up at Great America this summer. So look for them, Flight Attendant Paralysis. FAP, we call them FAP on the inside. Insiders, hashtag insiders. So we are on the 58th episode of The Record Store. It is in the dog days of summer, as it were. Hope it's not too sweltering where you are. But we are celebrating this week. The album that I pulled off the wall is by the band Boston, and it is Don't Look Back. It is their second album. And you know the drill for The Record Store. You know what we do. We got the giant wall over here of the CDs that is growing increasingly. I probably am going to get another dresser here or something. I definitely am. It's overflowing the giant stack along the wall. I've gone through a growth spurt, as it were, of the CD collection. The physical media, as people like to make fun of us and call it. But anyway, so the wall of CDs is ever expanding. I think I would say if you average it out, I probably buy about 2 or 3 CDs every time I go to the record store, the actual record store, Rolling Stone. And I go a couple times a month. So I'd say easily I'm probably adding anywhere from like 7 to 10 CDs a month. So of new stuff, old stuff, you name it, whatever. Just stuff I want to do to collect, to complete my collection on certain bands. So this is episode 58. It is Boston. It is Don't Look Back. That is the album that got grabbed. It is Boston's second album, came out in 1978. Of course, following up on their enormously successful debut album, self-titled, that was from 1976. That debut album sold over 18 million copies to this day. Don't Look Back, the second album, sold over 8 million copies. So, in a way, could you look at that as a disappointment? I don't think so. But anyway, and I forgot to mention, we pull out a random album off the wall, and then I just basically talk about that album. It may be something that I've listened to a ton, maybe something that I've never listened to because I actually have CDs in my collection, many, sadly, that I've never gotten around to listening to. I just had to have them at that moment. Had to have it, so have them. So anyway, and then we talk about it like so many kind of personal reflections of anything I had to do with that band or that performer in some capacity, as documented in the book, All the Right Notes. It's available on Amazon.com, All the Right Notes, for those discerning readers among you. And gift giving, too, as well. It's the dog days of summer. Give it to your best friend to read, so they got something to read on the beach and keep them busy. Or in the backyard, manning the cicada infestation in America. So anyway, that's what I do. I pull an album at random, talk about it, and go from there. So the Boston sound is very interesting. I think it's always been very calculated. It very much seems so planned. It's very precision and very precise. The playing on Boston albums is always very precise. I think a lot of comparisons, I've heard the term prog rock. I don't know if prog rock, I feel like prog rock is exclusively a British band thing. I probably am wrong there, but I feel like Boston, the comparisons for me for Boston are Yes and Rush. Again, very precise, very specific sound that they all had, not to each other per se, but like one Rush song after another, you can probably pretty much pick out that it's Rush. Same thing with Yes, I think, and definitely with Boston. So I loved all those bands, but for me, the big difference, there's a huge difference between, say, a Boston and a Guns N' Roses. Guns N' Roses, the music is reckless, all over the place. And then there's Boston, where it's very sterile and very controlled and like just a very specific sound. And not to say that one is right or wrong, like one any better than the other, but just two completely different sounds within rock and roll. Boston had 6 studio albums, believe it or not, and they had many classic rock radio hits. Technically, there still is a Boston. The last album was released in 2013. There is still speculation that there will be more, so stay tuned. Interestingly, there are 0 original members left aside from Tom Scholz himself, the founder of Boston. So he started them. He was a multi instrumentalist, one of those genius, music nerds. He started them, yes, in Massachusetts. Started in the early 70s. He hooked up with a guitarist by the name of Barry Goudreau and a singer by the name of Brad Delp. They played together in a couple bands. They kept working on songs that ended up basically comprising the first Boston album. So they added, down the line, they added a bass player named Fran Sheehan, and they added a drummer named Sib Hashian. So, and then at that point, Boston was complete in 1976. So again, the debut album came out, sold 17 million copies in the US, one of the greatest selling debut albums of all time. So, little known fact, and I honestly did not know this until I did the research for this episode. Tom Scholz played almost everything on their albums, and the other 3 musicians, obviously Brad Delp sang, but the other 3 musicians were mainly there for touring. So he's this mad audio scientist, like a Todd Rundgren type, and he works alone. He works in his basement, in his studio, in his basement, and the others were kind of just there to satisfy the record company and to satisfy the fact that they were eventually going to have to go on tour to support these albums. So it's just really, really interesting situation. So he put together the first album, played most everything, and then 2 years later, Don't Look Back was completed. What's interesting is it was a 2-year gap between the first album and the second album. Scholz actually said he felt rushed by Epic Records, and he was not happy with the end result of Don't Look Back. He was upset because they rushed it out. They were demanding, a follow-up after the incredible success of the first album. They had to have more, and he kept not stalling per se, but he's such a perfectionist that it took him forever, 2 years, to finally get Don't Look Back done and recorded and out. So, of course, legal woes ensued, management battles. There was management suing them. They sued management. There was all kinds of unrest over Tom Scholz's perfectionism and slow pace. Barry Goudreau, the one guitarist, got fired. Brad Delp quit. The 2 of them ended up working together, and they recorded some stuff that basically sounded just like Boston. And then the third album, after this one, after Don't Look Back, the third album came out 6 years later. So by the time the fourth album finally came out, Scholz was the only one left at that point of Boston, of the original Boston. So like I said, there were only 6 albums total. It seems like with their number of so many hits that they had, it seems like they should have had way more than 6 albums, but they only had 6 studio albums so far. We'll see. There might be another one in the works. So, couple sad things. Brad Delp died in 2007, the lead singer. That voice that is so recognizable and is just as much, if you ask me, that voice, the Brad Delp voice, is just as recognizable and just as prototypical of Boston as the guitar sound. So Brad Delp died in 2007, unfortunately committed suicide. The band continued touring, obviously took a break at that point, but they continued touring through the 2010s, primarily with Tom Scholz and just a menagerie of different players joining in and different singers joining in. And then in 2017, Sib Hashian, the original drummer, also died. He was performing on the Legends, one of those Legends of Rock cruises, and he died while playing on the cruise. So 2 of the original members are gone altogether. And then the other 2 guys, I believe, I don't know anything about Fran Sheehan at this point, but I know Barry Goudreau continues to record and release music, one of the original guitarists of Boston. And we'll see. Tom Scholz hopefully does put something out, still to come in terms of another Boston release. So another thing that's very stereotypical and well known about Boston is the guitar-shaped spaceship on all the album covers. It very much symbolic of Boston, just as much as Delp's voice and the unique guitar sound. And also the fact that they bragged so much that there were no synthesizers used on the albums. It was a badge of honor to Tom Scholz that everything was guitar-based for the most part. There were keyboards, obviously, but there was no synthesizers. So Don't Look Back, couple chart notes. It hit number 1 in the U.S., hit number 1 in Canada, hit number 9 in the United Kingdom. Three big singles from this album that we're going to talk about. Generally well received by the critics. It charted well in Europe, which to me it kind of makes sense because I feel like the sound of Boston just seems like it would connect with countries like France and Germany. Did well in Japan also, and all of that just for some reason it all just makes sense to me that Boston would do well in those other countries. So on this CD, it was a 2006 reissue. It was a remaster and reissued in 2006. I had the original vinyl. No idea where it's at, in the basement somewhere, but I have the CD as well. The liner notes on the CD were great. Were written by the great David Wild. David Wild, a great writer of music. Really always enjoy a little bit of a sense of humor in his writing about the music and the bands that he talks about, but he's written liner notes for a lot of cool bands, a lot of great bands. So I really always enjoy reading the work of David Wild in these new reissues. And to Tom Scholz's point, Don't Look Back was literally only 8 songs and only 34 minutes, one of the shortest albums I think we've ever covered on the Record Store. So I think that Tom Scholz was right that he was pissed that they made him release this before he considered it was ready. He felt it was too short. He felt that it needed at least one more song to complete it. And they just said, screw you, we need this album out. Let's go. Too late. It's been 2 years. Let's go already. Shit or get off the pot, So he was pissed. He didn't think it was a good work. But let us find out. What do we think of Don't Look Back in 2024? So the album opens up with the title track, Don't Look Back. It's got that iconic guitar open. And I think it's a perfect follow-up to the classic, debut album that was Boston that really put them on the map. So it fits right in with that their catalog. It moves them forward. I think it adds to their legacy. It's not a radical departure. It's not like it sounds like so much different from anything else that was on that Boston album. I think it's just another great song. So there's just something, when you listen to it, actually listen to the lyrics and listen to it. I think there's something very positive about it, very motivational. It's very inspiring to me. There's something very inspiring about the song. The song itself seems to be about moving forward in life and, quite frankly, not looking back, hence the name. So today's a new day. If you got to change things, then change things, make them better, move on. So I felt that it just an excellent song to open this album. Just really enjoyed Don't Look Back. Listening to it with a completely fresh mindset in not thinking about, how many millions of times I heard it on the radio when this album came out. So then we go to the second song, which is called The Journey. It just kind of fades in from the end of Don't Look Back. It kind of fades in. It's a instrumental, kind of a spacey sound to it, kind of a church organ-y kind of sound to it. It's very short, and then it just goes directly into the bombastic sound of the third song on the album, which is called It's Easy. This one is as close, for me, this one was as close as Boston's going to get to a love song. I felt like, I read an interpretation of this song that it was about a one-night stand, but I got the exact opposite feeling from this song. It felt to me like Scholz was singing to his wife, and somebody who I'm guessing he dated since grade school from these lyrics. It was kind of self-deprecating, as he says. Delp is singing it, but it's Tom Scholz doing all the writing. So Delp is singing it, and he sings, "I won't mind if you should find that you're in love with me." So self-deprecating to me. So I don't know, how does that represent a one-night stand? I don't know. The critics that said that, I'm not sure where they were getting that from, but he says he still has feelings. He still has the same feelings that he had in his younger days. I think it's very interesting, like I said in the very beginning, when you think about Boston and you think about how sterile and how I don't want to say scientific, but just very sterile sound to them, and in a good way. I'm not at all saying that as a rip. It's definitely just more the precision aspect. But I think it's so interesting to get emotion out of a band like Boston when they came across as being so clinical, and so sterile. So I think it's a really good song. It's Easy is a really good song. And like I said, I enjoyed the fact that there was kind of emotion here, and there was kind of the love story sense of the song. Not a one-night stand, critics. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. So, all right, we're at the halfway point. We are going to take a break. We're going to pay some bills. We're going to hear from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back with side 2 of Don't Look Back by Boston. Stay with us on the Record Store, guys. We'll be right back. Record Store Nation, we are back. Thank you. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you for helping us stay in the ramen and the Doritos and the coconut Dr. Pepper. And man, there's been 4 Mountain Dew releases this week. It's insane. So thank you, Patreons, for keeping us in all the junk food that will someday be a separate podcast. We shall see. The Tournament of Junk podcast, the TOJPOD. So anyway, this is not that. This is the Record Store. This is where we talk about music and we celebrate albums. And sometimes we rip albums, but, for the most part, I like the music that I like. But we do get critical sometimes. But this is where we pull a random album off the wall of albums over here. And this week we happen to pull Boston's Don't Look Back, their second album that sold 8 million. A disappointing 8 million. We should all be so disappointing in life. So we're ready for side 2 of Boston's Don't Look Back. So we're starting with the 4th song on the album. It's an 8-song album. So yeah, we're halfway through pretty much. So 4th song is called A Man I'll Never Be. It's a ballad. It's got a more of a frail sound from Brad Delp than you would ever have heard him on other songs. So, frail song starts with a very mellow piano open, and then the music kicks in, and then it's the pure Boston sound that you know and love. And it interesting lifts elements from hits from the first album. Like you can definitely hear riffs from the first album on this song. Again, I feel self-deprecating here, which, again, I don't really ever think of Boston that way. So he writes about this, again, it's a Tom Scholz song, but Brad Delp sings it, so bear with me here. So he writes about never being able to live up to expectations from her, whoever her is. So could his wife, his daughter, not sure what her he's talking about. So he feels that the image that he has is way more impressive than the man he feels that he is. So it's very deep, but yet there's the very familiar guitar backdrop to those words. So I feel like this is a song that if you've never heard it before and you listen to it, you would immediately know it's Boston. This just very, very prototypical sound, and it does not stray from that. After that, beginning with the frail sounding, Delp's voice and the piano. So there is a really good guitar solo in the midst of the song, though, I will say that. And what I think is interesting is, like I said, for me, and I'm objective, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If I feel like a riff has been lifted from a previous song, I'm going to say that. If something's been ripped off, I'm going to say that. I feel like they did lift stuff here from the first album. And I think today, critics would have had a field day on this song because of that. And somehow they let it slide back then. I don't know. In 78 when this came out, I think it was interesting that they let it slide. In fact, just the fact that it sounded like so many of their other songs from the first album. So I was okay with it. They ripped off from themselves. And it's just their sound. Bottom line is, it's just their sound. So it's going to sound like that. Every Boston song you hear, you're going to know right away is Boston. I suppose on the last 3 albums where it wasn't with Brad Delp singing, possibly you would not know that that's them. But I think for this song, A Man I'll Never Be, I actually liked it despite the fact that there's some obvious borrowing, shall we say, on this song. So next song is called Feelin' Satisfied. It was one of the singles from this album. Another really good song. And in the credits, it says it's written by Donald T. Scholz. So all the other songs said Tom Scholz, and this one said Donald T. Scholz. So I'm like, did he have a brother? Is there a brother writing this? Was it his dad writing this? Who knows? So let me research this and find out who is this mysterious Donald T. Scholz that this song is credited to. It's Tom Scholz. I'm like, oh, come on. You got my hopes up that there's going to be some cool reveal here. But I guess his full name is probably Donald Thomas Scholz or whatever. But Donald T. Scholz is really Tom Scholz. So I don't know what the point of that was, giving him credit as opposed to Tom Scholz being the writer for all the other songs. But mystery solved, so I guess I can make that claim. I did solve the big mystery here of Donald T. Scholz. So that was written by Donald T. Scholz, Feelin' Satisfied. So this one is a rock and roll anthem. It's another song that it feels like we've heard it before. Hey, you know what? Their formula worked, and this album sold 8 million copies, so for sure it worked and people liked it. So this is a fun song, and it works. It totally works. Feeling Satisfied. I'm really surprised again that the critics did not rip them because they lifted various sounds from other songs. Today they would totally have annihilated these guys. So this one is a party song. The line, "Come on, put your hands together, take a chance on rock and roll." Not exactly, the deepest lyrics ever, but with the hand claps, this feels like 100% like this was written for a live audience. So I think it's a great song. It's a real fun song for sure. Very much cotton candy, very much, just like a sugary hit song that they were going to have fun playing live no matter what. So loved Feeling Satisfied at number 5. So, all right, sixth song is called Party. It was co-written by Brad Delp and Donald T. Scholes, if you will. So Brad Delp, the late singer, co-wrote this song with him. And this one does feel different. It feels like this was Brad Delp letting his hair down a little bit versus, again, the very calculated framework of a Boston song and all the other songs that he had been singing for Boston and for Tom Scholes. So Party feels like he's literally singing about partying. It feels like he's singing about just having fun, getting wild, getting crazy. This is not Boston material. The sound is definitely there. The sound that, again, those guitars that you're so used to hearing from Boston that you would be able to pick out in a lineup without a singer. You'd probably still be able to pick it out that it was a Boston song. But the lyrics were totally out of character here. And quite honestly, it was refreshing. So I'm sure that was Delp's writing that made it seem completely different from another Boston song. So what Party sounded like to me was that it was Van Halen lyrics, but Boston playing it. So I thought it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed Party at the 6th spot. So then we go to the 7th song. It is called Used to Bad News. And this one, Brad Delp wrote entirely. So there is no Tom Scholes. There is no Donald T. Scholes. Neither one of those guys, the Siamese twins or whatever they were. So there is just completely Brad Delp influence on this. So Used to Bad News, the critics loved this song. They went crazy over this song, and they said it reminded them of the Beatles. Many of them said it reminded them of the Beatles. Maybe. I feel that was kind of a stretch, but not a ton. I think it was kind of a stretch to say it was like the Beatles. If you want to hear a band that was influenced by the Beatles, I'm sure obviously there's dozens and dozens, but Tears for Fears is a band that is majorly, practically album for album, song for song, you can hear the Beatles' influence in Tears for Fears. So I don't necessarily hear it in Boston. I still totally hear the Boston sound on this song. I'm not sure what kind of bad news they're referring to because, let's face it, that first album sold over 17 million copies and right away, and it's up to 18 million now. But what kind of bad news are you getting? You just sold 17 million albums, of the album that came before this. So they had nothing to complain about. But it is a good song. I enjoyed it. But what I will say is it becomes more poignant when you think about Brad Delp's suicide about 30 years later. So Used to Bad News, maybe he was dealing with demons even back then, even back in the late 70s when they recorded this. So, and he wrote it, and it's still a great song, and it still holds up to this day. And it also gave kind of a different feeling and different vibe for Boston as opposed to what we were so used to, from that sound and that band, at least for the first 3 albums.